Some people don't want to be saved, they just don't know how to stop drowning. The rain had been falling for hours, steady and relentless, the kind that blurred streetlights into soft halos and turned empty sidewalks into reflections of a world I no longer felt part of. And I stood there in the middle of it, soaked through, my jacket clinging to my skin, my breath uneven like I had been running even though I hadn't taken a single step in 10 minutes. Because leaving felt harder than staying, and staying felt impossible. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't know which one scared me more, the silence around me or the noise inside my head. The kind that never stopped replaying everything I wished I could forget, every word, every moment, every mistake. And I remember thinking that if I just stood there long enough, maybe the rain would wash something away, maybe it would take the weight with it, maybe it would make me feel less broken, but it didn't. It never did. And that's when I heard the sound, low at first, almost swallowed by the storm, an engine, cutting through the quiet like it didn't belong there, like it had somewhere important to be, somewhere I clearly didn't, and I didn't turn around, not at first, because nothing ever came looking for me, not anymore, not since I learned that people only stayed when they needed something, and I had nothing left to give. But the car didn't pass, it slowed, tires crunching lightly against the wet pavement until the headlights stretched past me, long beams of white cutting across the street like a spotlight I didn't ask for. And I felt it then, that shift in the air, subtle but unmistakable, like the moment before a storm breaks. Only this one didn't come from the sky. And I hated that my heart reacted, that it picked up just enough to remind me I was still alive, because I wasn't sure I wanted to be, not like this, not anymore. The passenger door opened with a quiet precision that didn't match the chaos around us, and I could hear footsteps, measured, unhurried, the kind that didn't rush because they never had to. And I told myself not to look, not to care, just keep staring ahead, keep pretending the world didn't exist. But something about the way he moved, the way the rain seemed to fall around him instead of on him, made it impossible to ignore. And when I finally turned, just slightly, just enough to see him through the edge of my vision, I realized this wasn't someone who stumbled into moments like this. This was someone who created them, tall, composed, dressed in a way that didn't belong on an empty street at midnight. His presence too sharp, too controlled, like everything about him had been decided long before he ever stepped out of that car. And his eyes found me instantly, not searching, not questioning, just locking in, like I was already part of something I didn't understand. And for a second, just 1 second, the rain didn't matter, the noise didn't matter. Even the ache in my chest faded just enough to make room for something else. Something unfamiliar, something dangerous. Because the way he looked at me wasn't curiosity, it wasn't concern, it was recognition. Like he saw something I had spent months trying to hide. And when he finally spoke, his voice low, steady, cutting clean through the storm, it wasn't a question, it wasn't even an offer, it was a statement, simple, controlled, undeniable. You shouldn't be out here alone. And I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was the first time anyone had noticed, and the worst part was, I didn't know if I wanted him to. I should have walked away. I should have said nothing, should have pretended I did not hear him at all. But something in his voice made it impossible to ignore, not loud, not forceful, just certain, like the kind of certainty that did not leave room for arguments. And I hated that it reached me, that it cut through everything I had carefully built to keep people out. So I shook my head slightly, more to myself than to him, and said, I am fine, even though the words felt hollow the second they left my mouth, because I was not fine, not even close, and he knew it. I could see it in the way his eyes did not move, did not soften, just stayed there, steady, reading me like I was something written in plain sight. And for a moment neither of us said anything. The rain filling the space between us, tapping against the pavement, against the car, against my shoulders like a quiet reminder that time was still moving even if I felt stuck. And then he stepped closer, not enough to invade, just enough to shift the air again. And I felt it, that strange pull, like standing too close to the edge of something you did not fully understand. You are shaking, he said, and I almost denied it again out of instinct, but my hands betrayed me, fingers trembling slightly at my sides, and I clenched them into fists, trying to regain some kind of control. Any kind. It is just cold, I replied, forcing the words to sound steady, But he did not react the way most people would. He did not offer a jacket, did not ask more questions. He just watched, like he was deciding something, calculating in a way that made my chest tighten, and before I could stop him, he turned slightly toward the car, speaking in a low voice I could barely hear, and suddenly I was not alone with him anymore. Two men stepped out from the front seats, both dressed in dark coats, both moving with the same quiet precision, and something in my stomach dropped, not fear exactly, but awareness, the kind that told you this was not normal, this was not random, this was something else entirely, and I took a step back without meaning to, instinct finally catching up with reality. I said I am fine, I repeated, stronger this time, needing the distance, needing something that felt like control, and for the first time, his expression shifted, not anger, not frustration, just the faintest hint of something I could not name, like he was not used to being refused, but he did not argue, did not force anything. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled something out, a simple gesture, slow, deliberate, and held it out toward me. A small, folded umbrella, black, unremarkable. But in that moment it felt heavier than it should have, like it carried a meaning I did not understand. Take it, he said, and I stared at it, then at him, waiting for the catch, because there was always a catch. There was always something behind the gesture, but his face gave nothing away, just that same calm certainty, and I realized I had been standing in the rain for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to be offered something without expectation, and that scared me more than anything else, because accepting it meant letting something in, even if it was small, even if it was just an umbrella, and I did not know if I could afford that, not anymore. But my fingers moved anyway, slowly, hesitantly, taking it from his hand, brushing against his skin for the briefest second, and the contact was enough to send a strange, unfamiliar warmth through me, something that did not belong to the cold night or the storm or the version of myself I had become, and I pulled back quickly, gripping the handle tighter than necessary. Thank you, I said, the words quiet, almost reluctant, and for a moment, just a moment, something changed in his eyes, not softer, not exactly, but different, like he had been waiting for that, not the words, but the choice. And then he stepped back, creating space. Again, but not leaving. Not yet, his voice lower this time, almost thoughtful. You do not have to stand here anymore, he said, and I realized then that he was not just talking about the rain. I did not move right away, even after he said it. Even after the rain kept falling and the cold started to settle deeper into my bones, because leaving meant choosing something, and I had been avoiding choices for a long time. But the umbrella in my hand felt real, solid, like proof that something had already shifted whether I wanted it to or not, and I slowly opened it. The soft click louder than it should have been in the quiet street, the fabric stretching above me, blocking out the rain. That had been my only company for the past hour, and for the first time that night, the world felt slightly different, quieter, like the storm had stepped back just enough to let me hear my own thoughts again, and I hated that it was because of him, because I did not want to owe anything to anyone, not anymore. But when I looked up, he was still there, still watching, still waiting without pressing, and that made it worse somehow, because there was no clear reason to push him away, no obvious threat to justify the walls I kept rebuilding. And yet every instinct told me to run, to disappear before this turned into something I could not control. Why are you doing this? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it, and his expression did not change, not even slightly, but there was a pause, just long enough to feel intentional, like he was deciding how much to say. Because you needed it, he answered simply, and that should have been enough. It should have been easy to dismiss. But the way he said it, calm, certain, like it was not a guess but a fact, made something tighten in my chest, because he was right, and I did not like that he could see it so clearly. You do not know me, I said quickly, sharper this time, needing to reclaim something, anything, and for a second, I thought that would be the end of it, that he would nod, step back, get into his car, disappear into whatever world he came from. But instead, he tilted his head slightly, studying me in a way that felt too close even from a few feet away. No, he agreed. But I know what it looks like when someone has nothing left to hold on to. And the words hit harder than they should have, not loud, not dramatic, just quiet and precise, like he had said them before, like he had lived them, and I felt my grip tighten around the umbrella handle, my mind scrambling for something to say, something to deflect, but nothing came. Because for a moment, just one moment, I believed him, and that scared me more than anything else, because belief led to trust, and trust was something I had learned to survive without. But before I could respond, one of the men near the car stepped forward slightly, not interrupting, just reminding, and I saw the smallest shift in his posture, the way his attention flickered for half a second before returning to me, controlled, always controlled, and it clicked then, not fully, not enough to understand everything, but enough to know that he was not just a man who happened to be here. He was someone who carried a world with him, a world that moved when he moved, that waited when he stopped, and suddenly the distance between us felt larger, heavier. Like I had stepped into something I could not see the edges of. I should go, I said finally, my voice quieter now, steadier, because staying felt dangerous in a way I could not explain. And for the first time since he approached me, he nodded, just once, like he had expected that answer all along. Yes, he said. But he did not move, did not turn away, just watched as I took a step back, then another. The umbrella shielding me from the rain, but not from the weight of his gaze, and I forced myself to turn, to walk, to put distance between us before I changed my mind. Before whatever this was pulled me back in, my footsteps echoing softly against the wet pavement, each one feeling heavier than the last, and I told myself not to look back, not to check if he was still there, because it did not matter, none of it mattered. This was just a moment, just a stranger in the rain, nothing more. But halfway down the block, I stopped, just for a second, just long enough to feel it again. That strange pull, that quiet certainty that something had already changed whether I accepted it or not. And before I could stop myself, I turned my head slightly, just enough to see the outline of him still standing there under the streetlight, unmoving, watching, like he had no intention of forgetting me. And that was the moment I realized I might not be able to forget him either. I told myself it was over the moment I turned that corner, that whatever had just happened would stay behind me like everything else I had learned to leave behind. But the truth was it followed me, not in footsteps or shadows, but in the quiet space it left behind, the kind that made everything else feel louder, sharper, more real. And by the time I reached my apartment building, the rain had slowed to a soft drizzle, the streets nearly empty, the city settling into that strange in-between hour where nothing quite felt awake and nothing fully asleep, and I stood there for a second, staring at the worn-out entrance like it belonged to someone else, like I was not sure I wanted to go back inside, because inside meant silence, meant the same walls, the same thoughts, the same version of myself I had been trying to escape. But I went in anyway, pushing the door open, the familiar creak echoing louder than it should have, and climbed the stairs slowly, each step heavy, not from exhaustion, but from something I could not name, something that had shifted just enough to make everything feel off balance. And when I finally reached my apartment, I paused, my hand resting on the handle, the umbrella still in my other hand. And for a moment, I just stared at it, at the clean black fabric, at the way it looked untouched by the storm that had soaked everything else. And I realized I did not even know his name, did not know where he came from or why he stopped. And yet somehow he had left something behind, something that did not belong in my world, and I did not know what to do with that. So I stepped inside, closed the door, and leaned against it, letting the quiet settle around me. But it did not feel the same as before. It was not empty, not completely. There was something else now, something unfamiliar, like a question I could not answer, and I moved through the apartment on autopilot, dropping my bag, kicking off my shoes, turning on a dim lamp that barely lit the room, the soft yellow glow casting shadows that stretched longer than they should have, and I sank onto the edge of the couch, the umbrella resting beside me, out of place against the worn fabric and cluttered space. And I let out a slow breath I did not realize I had been holding, telling myself it was nothing, just a moment, just a stranger. But my mind did not listen. It kept replaying the way he looked at me, the way he spoke, the way he seemed to see through everything I tried to hide. And I hated that it stayed with me, that it mattered even a little, because that was how it started. That was how people got in, slowly, quietly, until you forgot how to keep them out. And I pushed myself up, moving toward the small kitchen, grabbing a glass of water just to have something to do, something normal, something grounded. but even that felt different, like I was moving through a version of my life that no longer fit. The same way, and I set the glass down, untouched, turning back toward the living room just as my phone buzzed on the table. The sudden sound sharp in the silence, and I froze for a second before picking it up, expecting nothing, expecting no one, but the screen lit up with an unknown number, no name, no message, just a missed call that had come through seconds ago, and my chest tightened without reason, without logic, because it could have been anyone, a wrong number, a mistake, something meaningless. But my mind went somewhere else entirely, somewhere I did not want it to go, and I stared at the screen a second too long before setting it back down, telling myself not to read into it, not to connect things that were not connected. But the feeling did not go away. It stayed there, quiet and persistent, like a thread pulling at the edge of something I could not see yet, and I turned back toward the couch, toward the umbrella, and for the first time since I stepped inside, I realized something I had not allowed myself to admit before. He had not just found me in the rain. He had followed me out of it. I barely slept that night, not because of noise or discomfort, but because my mind refused to settle, replaying every second like it was trying to find something I missed, something important hidden in the way he spoke, the way he looked at me like I was not invisible. And by the time the first light of morning slipped through the thin curtains, I was already awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling that same quiet tension sitting just beneath my ribs, and I told myself it was nothing, just a stranger, just a moment. But even as I got up, moving through my routine with slow, mechanical motions, I knew it was not that simple, because nothing had felt normal since I walked away from him. And when I reached for my jacket hanging by the door, my hand paused, brushing against the umbrella still resting on the small table beside it, exactly where I had left it, untouched, like it had been waiting for me to decide what it meant. And I hesitated before picking it up, my fingers tightening slightly around the handle, remembering the brief warmth of his hand, the calm certainty in his voice, and I almost left it behind, almost convinced myself that taking it with me would mean accepting something I was not ready for. But instead I held on to it, stepping outside into a city that looked the same but felt different, the streets busier now, people moving with purpose, cars passing by in steady lines, everything alive in a way I did not feel, and I kept my head down as I walked, blending into the crowd, trying to disappear into something familiar, something safe. But it did not take long before I noticed it. Not something obvious, not something I could point to, just a feeling, subtle and persistent, like being watched without seeing who was doing the watching. And I slowed slightly, my eyes flickering to the reflection in a store window as I passed, scanning the movement behind me without turning around. But there was nothing unusual, just people going about their day. And yet the feeling did not fade. It stayed there, quiet but undeniable. And I told myself I was imagining it, that I was letting one strange encounter turn into something bigger than it was, but my instincts did not agree, and they had never been wrong before. So I kept walking, faster now, turning onto a different street than usual, then another, testing it, trying to shake whatever this was. But each time I glanced at a reflection, each time I slowed or changed direction, the same quiet awareness lingered, not threatening, not aggressive, just present. Like something was keeping pace with me without needing to be seen, and my grip on the umbrella tightened as I stepped into a small coffee shop, the bell above the door chiming softly as I entered, the warm air wrapping around me, carrying the scent of fresh coffee and something sweet, grounding in a way that almost made me forget the tension outside. And I moved to the counter, ordering without thinking, my voice steady even as my mind stayed alert, scanning, listening, waiting. And when I turned to find a seat, that was when I saw him, not the man from the night before, but one of the others, one of the men who had stepped out of the car, sitting near the window with a cup of coffee he had not touched. His posture relaxed, but his attention unmistakable. And the moment our eyes met, he did not look away, did not pretend, just gave the slightest nod, respectful, controlled, like he was acknowledging something already understood. And my heart skipped, not from fear, but from confirmation, because I had not imagined it. I had not created it in my head. This was real. Whatever this was, it had followed me into daylight, into normal life, into the places that were supposed to be mine, and I felt that same shift again, that same realization settling deeper this time, heavier, undeniable, Because this was no longer just a moment in the rain. This was something else entirely, something that had already begun before I even knew I was part of it. I did not sit down right away, even though my coffee was already waiting at the counter. Even though everything around me looked normal, sounded normal, felt normal to anyone else. Because nothing about this was normal anymore. Not after seeing him. Not after realizing that whatever I had stepped into last night had not stayed there. It had followed me into daylight, into routine, into the version of my life I had been trying to keep separate from everything else. And I forced myself to move. To act like it did not matter. Like I had not just made eye contact with someone who clearly knew exactly who I was. And I picked up my cup, the warmth seeping into my hands, grounding me just enough to take a breath, slow and controlled. And I walked to a table near the back, not too far, not too close, placing myself where I could see him without turning my head, where I could pretend I was just another customer passing time instead of someone trying to understand what was happening. And I sat there for a few seconds, staring down at the surface of the coffee, watching the faint ripples settle, telling myself to think, to stay calm, to not let this spiral into something bigger than it needed to be. But the truth was I already knew it was bigger, because people did not send someone to sit quietly in a coffee shop just to watch, not without a reason, and I had a feeling I was that reason. And the thought should have scared me more than it did, but instead it made something else rise up, something quieter, sharper, something that had been buried under everything I had been trying not to feel. Because if this was intentional, if this was planned, then that meant last night was not random, and that meant him, the way he looked at me, the way he spoke, the way he acted like he already understood something about me. None of that was coincidence, and I did not know if that made it better or worse. And I finally looked up, meeting the man's gaze again, holding it this time instead of looking away. And for a second nothing happened, no movement, no reaction, just a silent acknowledgement passing between us. And then he stood, slow and deliberate, picking up his untouched cup before walking toward me with the same controlled ease I had noticed the night before, and every instinct told me to leave, to stand up and walk out before he reached the table. But I stayed, because running would not change anything, not anymore. And he stopped a few feet away, close enough to speak without raising his voice, but not close enough to feel invasive. And when he spoke, his tone was calm, respectful, almost formal. "Miss Carter," he said. And hearing my name from a stranger's mouth sent a quiet shock through me that I did not let show, because that confirmed it. Whatever this was, it had already gone further than I realized. "You should not worry," he continued, as if that was something I had the option to do, as if that was something anyone could just decide. And I let out a small breath, setting my cup down carefully before responding, keeping my voice even. "Then you should give me a reason not to." And something flickered in his expression. Not surprise exactly, but recognition, like he had expected resistance, expected pushback, and did not mind it. And he nodded once, acknowledging that without comment. "Mr. Volkov wants to make sure you are safe," he said. And there it was, a name, finally something concrete. In the middle of all this uncertainty, and I felt it settle into place. Adrian Volkov, the man in the rain, the man who looked at me like he already knew me, the man who did not leave when he could have. And I leaned back slightly, studying him now, not just reacting, not just trying to understand, but choosing to engage. Because if this was going to continue, if this was already part of my life whether I wanted it or not, then I needed to see it clearly, not through fear, not through assumptions, but through truth. "And what makes him think I need that?" I asked, and the man did not hesitate, did not soften the answer, did not pretend. "Because he does not take chances," he said simply. And something about that, the certainty, the finality, the quiet authority behind it, told me everything I needed to know. This was not about me asking for help. This was about him deciding I needed it. And the realization should have made me push back harder, should have made me walk away immediately. But instead I found myself sitting there, listening, holding on to the edge of something I could not fully understand yet. Because for the first time in a long time, someone was not asking if I needed saving. They had already decided I did. I held his gaze for a second longer than necessary, letting the silence stretch between us, not because I did not have anything to say, but because I wanted to see if he would fill it, if he would try to explain more than he already had. But he did not. He just stood there, composed, patient, like a man who understood that time was never something he had to chase, and that alone told me more than his words ever could. Because people who moved like that, people who waited like that, they were used to being obeyed, used to decisions happening around them without needing to push, and I leaned back slightly in my chair, crossing my arms loosely, not defensive, just controlled. You keep saying that like it is a fact, I said, my voice calm but sharper now, like I do not get a say in it. And he tilted his head just slightly, considering, but there was no apology in his expression, no hesitation. You always have a say, he replied. But Mr. Volkov prefers not to rely on it. And I let out a quiet breath that was almost a laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was honest in a way I did not expect, direct, unpolished. Like he was not trying to convince me of anything, just stating the reality as it was. And that made it harder to push back, harder to dismiss, because there was no manipulation to argue against, just a truth I did not like. And I picked up my coffee, taking a small sip more out of habit than anything else, the warmth steadying me again, giving me a second to think, to decide how I wanted to handle this. Because reacting was easy, reacting was instinct, but choosing was something else entirely. And I set the cup down carefully, meeting his eyes again, then tell him to stop. I said, simple, clear, giving him the option, giving him the chance to walk away from whatever this was before it went further. And for a brief moment, something shifted in his expression, not doubt, not uncertainty, just acknowledgement, like he understood what I was asking even if he already knew the answer. I can deliver the message, he said, but I do not believe it will change anything. And there it was. Again, that quiet certainty, that sense that whatever decision had been made did not depend on me, did not bend around my comfort or my resistance. And I felt that same tension rise in my chest, not fear, not exactly, but something close to it, something that came from realizing you were standing at the edge of something you could not control. And I pushed my chair back slightly, the legs scraping softly against the floor as I stood, because sitting here, pretending this was just a conversation, pretending this was something I could negotiate or reason with, it felt wrong. It felt like playing a game where the rules had already been decided without me. And I was not ready to accept that, not yet. Then you should probably tell him I do not like being watched, I added, my voice steady as I picked up my umbrella, the same one he had given me, the weight of it suddenly more noticeable in my hand. And for the first time, the man's gaze dropped to it, just for a second, before returning to my face, and I saw it then, the smallest hint of something beneath the surface, not amusement, not approval, just recognition, like he understood the significance of it in a way I was only beginning to understood, he said simply, stepping back slightly, giving me space without being told, and I moved past him without another word, walking toward the door, the bell chiming softly as I pushed it open, the cool air outside brushing against my skin, sharper now, more real, and I did not look back this time, not even for a second, because I already knew what I would see. I already knew this was not over. And as I stepped onto the sidewalk, blending back into the flow of the city, I realized something I had been trying not to admit since the moment he spoke my name. This was not about whether I needed saving. This was about whether I was willing to be part of whatever he had already decided I was. I walked without a destination for a while after leaving the coffee shop, letting the city carry me forward in a direction I did not choose. The noise of traffic and voices blending into a steady hum that felt almost distant, like I was moving through it instead of being part of it. And I kept telling myself that I had done the right thing, that drawing a line, even a small one, mattered, that saying I did not like being watched should have meant something, but deep down I knew it would not be that simple, because nothing about him had been simple from the start. Not the way he appeared out of nowhere, not the way he looked at me like he had already made up his mind, and definitely not the way his world seemed to move around him without needing explanation. And by the time I reached the edge of the park a few blocks away, I slowed, stepping onto the quieter path lined with trees that filtered the light into soft patterns across the ground. The air cooler here, calmer, the kind of place people came to think or to forget. And I stood there for a moment, letting the stillness settle, trying to convince myself that I could step back into my life, that I could go to work, go home, repeat the same routine until whatever this was faded into something I could ignore. But the thought felt thin, fragile, like it would break the moment I tested it, and I closed my eyes briefly, exhaling slowly, grounding myself in something real, something I could control, but when I opened them again, I saw it. Not directly, not in a way anyone else would notice, just a black car parked across the street beyond the trees, still, quiet, out of place in a way that made it stand out once you knew what to look for, and I did not need to see who was inside to understand what it meant, and for a second, something sharp rose in my chest, not fear, not panic, just frustration, because I had already said no, I had already made it clear, and yet here it was, this invisible line being crossed again without permission, without hesitation, like my choice had been acknowledged but not accepted, and I almost turned away, almost walked in the opposite direction just to prove that I could, just to show that I was not going to follow whatever path had been laid out for me. But instead I did something else, something I had not done before. I stepped off the path and walked straight toward the street, toward the car, each step steady, deliberate, my grip tightening slightly around the umbrella as I closed the distance. And when I reached the curb, I stopped, standing there in full view, not hiding, not avoiding, just present. And for a moment nothing happened. The car remained still, the windows dark, the silence stretching just long enough to feel intentional. And then the driver's side door opened, slow and controlled, and he stepped out, Adrian Volkov, exactly as I remembered, exactly as I had tried not to remember. Composed, precise, like the world adjusted itself to his pace instead of the other way around. And our eyes met instantly. No hesitation, no surprise, just recognition. Like he had expected this, like he had been waiting for me to come to him instead of the other way around. And I took a breath, steadying myself, refusing to let the weight of his presence shift me. I told your people to stop watching me, I said, my voice calm but firm, cutting through the quiet space between us. And he did not respond right away, just studied me for a second, that same unreadable expression, that same quiet intensity that made it feel like he was seeing more than what was in front of him. And when he finally spoke, his voice was just as steady, just as certain as the night before. I heard you, he said, and something in the way he said it made my chest tighten, because it was not dismissive, it was not careless, it was simply true, and I shook my head slightly, taking a small step closer without realizing it. Then why is this still happening? I asked, and for the first time, there was a pause, not hesitation, but consideration, like he was choosing his words carefully instead of reacting, and when he answered, it was quieter than I expected, almost thoughtful. Because I do not ignore things that matter, he said, and the words settled heavier than they should have, not because of what they meant, but because of how easily he said them, like it was obvious, like there was no other option, and I felt that shift again, that pull between resistance and something else I could not fully define, because part of me wanted to push back harder, to walk away and not look back, but another part, quieter but persistent, was starting to understand something I had not allowed myself to see before. This was not about control, not entirely. This was about choice, his choice, and whether I liked it or not, he had already chosen me. For a moment, neither of us moved, the space between us holding something heavier than words, something that did not need to be said out loud to be understood, and I felt it again, that quiet pressure, not forcing, not demanding, just present, like gravity pulling without asking permission, and I tightened my grip on the umbrella, grounding myself in something physical, something real, because everything else about this felt like it was slipping into a place I could not control. You do not get to decide that, I said finally, my voice steady even as my chest felt tighter than before. You do not get to decide what matters to me. And his expression did not change, not in any obvious way, but there was a shift, subtle, almost imperceptible, like he was adjusting something internally, recalibrating in a way that most people would never notice, and he took a single step closer, closing just enough distance to make the moment feel sharper, more focused. You are right, he said, and the words caught me off guard, not because of what they meant, but because of how easily he said them. No argument, no resistance, just acceptance, and for a second, I did not know how to respond, because I had expected pushback, expected control, expected something that justified the walls I had already started to rebuild, but instead, he gave me space, and that made everything more complicated. Then why are you still here? I asked, quieter now, because this was not just about him anymore. This was about understanding what I was standing in front of, what I was choosing to engage with. And his gaze did not leave mine as he answered. Because you are, he said simply, and something about that, the directness, the lack of explanation, the way it did not try to convince or persuade, just stated something as it was, made my breath catch for a second. Because it was not about control in the way I understood it. It was not about ownership or power. In the way I had seen before, it was something else, something quieter, something that did not demand but did not leave either. And I looked away briefly, breaking the intensity just long enough to think, to breathe, to remind myself that I still had a choice in this, that I could walk away, that I could step back into my life and leave this behind. But when I looked back at him, he had not moved, not even slightly, still there, still watching, not expecting, not rushing, just present. And I realized something then, something that shifted the way I saw all of this. He was not trying to pull me into his world, not in the way I had feared. He was simply standing in it and waiting to see if I would step closer on my own. And that realization changed something inside me. Not completely, not enough to trust, not enough to let everything down, but enough to pause, enough to consider, enough to stop running for the first time in a long time. And I took a slow breath, steadying myself. You cannot follow me everywhere, I said, softer now, not a challenge, not a demand, just a statement of reality. And he nodded once, like he agreed, like he understood something I had not said. Out loud? I do not need to, he replied, and there was something different in his voice this time, something quieter, almost reflective. You will come back, he added, not as a command, not as a threat, just as a certainty. And I felt it then, not fear, not resistance, but something else, something that settled deeper, because part of me wanted to deny it immediately, wanted to reject the idea that he could know anything about what I would do. But another part, the part that had stopped running just a few seconds ago, recognized the truth in it. Not because of him, but because of me, because for the first time in a long time, something had reached through the noise, through the weight, through everything I had been carrying, and made me feel something other than empty. And I looked at him for a second longer before stepping back, creating space again, not as an escape, but as a choice. We will see, I said quietly, and I turned, walking away without rushing, without looking back this time, because I did not need to. I already knew he would still be there. And as I moved through the city again, blending into the rhythm of everything I had known before, I realized something I had not allowed myself to admit until now. He may have stepped into my world without asking, but I was the one who would decide how far he stayed, and whether I liked it or not. Part of me had already taken a step toward him.